I turned around, and man, the air just froze. My gut twisted hard, like I knew I was about to see something I'd regret. And there it was, something in the corner, something I wish I'd never laid eyes on. In the corner, there was this shadow, an abyss, so dark it seemed to swallow all the light around it. It wasn't just dark, it felt wrong, like a hole ripped out of reality itself. The air felt damp, like an old basement. There was a faint smell of something rotting, enough to make you hold your breath. A faint rustling sound echoed, like dry leaves, except there were no leaves. It all just added to the uneasy feeling. Its arms stretched out unnaturally long, dragging across the floor like they were searching for something. My legs felt weak, barely able to hold me up. My jaw clenched, teeth chattering. Everything in me screamed to move, but I was stuck, frozen. My throat tightened, and I couldn't do anything but stand there in fear. I tried to pull myself together, but the room felt like it was closing in, like it was about to swallow me whole. All I could think of was Mike's face from earlier, grim as hell while he was filling me in. He'd warned me about the reports, people seeing shadows, feeling watched, stuff moving around on its own. I thought it was just some paranoid neighbors, you know? But now it was getting too real. And this wasn't just about creepy shadows anymore, a kid was involved. I had to push through the fear. I wasn't walking away from this. It was about 6 months ago when Mike and I first heard about the Ice Keeper. We were in the station, pulling a late shift. Mike had this old book in his hands, pages yellowed, the cover all worn and scratched. He looked at me, dead serious. "Jonah, you ever heard of the Ice Keeper?" I shook my head. "What, some bedtime story?" Mike didn't laugh. He flipped it open, and there were these stories of people going missing, some who were losing their minds. He pointed to one of the pages. "This book, it's been passed around for years, and everyone who gets it, something bad happens." I shrugged it off back then. Ghost stories weren't really my thing. But now, standing in that room, I knew this was no joke. Mike had been right, and that book was trouble. I heard Eric's little voice in my head.
Make him stop! He scares me! He says things, bad things about Mom, and you, and what he would to us.
Hearing his voice like that made my chest tighten. The fear in his words wasn't just some kid being scared of the dark. This was something deep, something real that shook him to his core. And now, it was shaking me too. I couldn't let this slide. Something had a hold on Tommy, Eric's brother, and I promised that kid I'd help. The house itself felt like it was suffocating. It was dark, with this stale, metallic scent in the air that made me think of rust, or worse, blood. Eric's mom led me inside. She looked hollow, like she'd been drained of everything but a sliver of hope. She held this photo of her boys, Eric and Tommy, and I could see her hands trembling. Her voice was shaky. "He was such a good little kid. I don't understand what happened to him." Jonah could see the exhaustion etched into her face, the way her eyes seemed hollow, almost pleading. She looked broken, like a person barely holding on, and it made his heart ache. She needed hope, but even he wasn't sure if he could give it to her. I remembered seeing Tommy a couple of times before. He was always smiling, always watching out for his little brother. But then, things changed. Eric's mom had told us about how Tommy had started acting strange, standing in the hallway at night, staring at nothing. He'd whisper things that scared Eric so much he'd come running to his mom. Then one day, Tommy just vanished. "Where's Tommy now?" I asked, trying to keep my own fear from creeping in. "Upstairs, last door on the left," she said, barely more than a whisper. She glanced at the staircase, her hands trembling, her steps hesitant, like she was scared to even look up there. I took a deep breath and started up the narrow staircase. Every step creaked under my weight, and it got colder with every step, like the temperature was dropping just for me. By the time I got to the top, I could literally see my breath. I stood there, hand on the doorknob, feeling like something on the other side was just waiting for me. I finally turned the knob and pushed the door open. The room was small, just a bed, some shelves with toys and books. But the air felt heavy, like something was pressing down on me. My eyes went straight to the corner, where the shadows seemed to move, darker than the rest of the room. It felt alive, like it was breathing, watching. The door behind me slammed shut, bam, like it was trying to trap me. The temperature dropped, like I'd just walked into a freezer. I couldn't tell if I was shivering from the cold or from fear. My flashlight flickered, and for just a second, I saw him, this small figure hunched in the corner, eyes like dark, empty pits, mouth twisted in anger.
"You shouldn't be here." His voice, man, it was filled with this rage that shouldn't come from a kid his age. My heart was pounding, and I stumbled back, hitting the door. My fingers were numb, scrambling for the handle.
"Tommy, I'm here to help," I managed, my voice barely holding it together. "Your brother, he misses you. He wants you back." The figure flickered, and the shadows seemed to pull tighter around him, like they were trying to swallow him whole. His eyes locked onto mine, and they were just empty.
He can't help me! No one can! You need to leave! Now!
The words hit me like a punch, and I gasped, my hand finally finding the handle. I yanked the door open and stumbled out, nearly falling over myself as I slammed it shut. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. I was shaking all over, like I'd just survived something I shouldn't have. I backed away, nearly tripping over my own feet as I tried to put as much distance between me and that room as possible.
When I made it downstairs, Eric's mom looked at me, eyes full of desperate hope. I forced a smile, even though I was still terrified out of my mind. I couldn't imagine what she was going through, seeing her kid turn into that.
"I'm going to do everything I can," I said, trying to sound convincing. "I won't give up on Tommy." She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "Please, bring my boy back." I left the house, my mind racing. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was in way over my head. This wasn't just a haunting, this was something darker, something twisted, something that fed on fear like it was fuel. And Mike was probably right. Whatever this Eyes Keeper book was, it had to be behind all of this. Back at the station, I found Mike hunched over a stack of files. He looked up when I walked in, his face even more lined with worry.
"Jonah, you look like you've seen a ghost."
"I think I have," I said, sinking into the chair across from him, my voice still shaky. "We need to find that book, Mike. The Eyes Keeper. Whatever's happening to Tommy, it's tied to that, I know it."
"I've been digging. The book's got a history, a nasty one. People who come into contact with it don't tend to end well. Disappearances, suicides, weird behavior. It's like it's cursed."
"Where is it now?"
"Last seen, I guess with some collector, some guy that deals in creepy artifacts, but he's gone off the grid. No one's seen him in months."
"Then we find him. Whatever it takes. Eric and his family are running out of time, man."
"I'll make some calls. We'll track that son of a bitch down."
As I left Mike's office, I felt this urgency settle in. It was like the shadows were following me, whispering just out of sight. This wasn't over. Whatever had a hold on Tommy wasn't done. And I knew I was in for a fight I couldn't afford to lose. The next morning, I dragged myself into the station. I barely slept. Every creak in my apartment felt like a warning, like something was coming for me. And the shadows? They felt alive, like they were watching me, waiting for the perfect moment to move. But I wasn't about to back down. I promised Eric, and I couldn't let that kid down. The second I walked in, Mike was already waiting, looking pale and tense. He nodded toward the waiting area, and there was Eric, sitting alone, fidgeting. He couldn't have been more than 10, and he looked like he hadn't slept at all, eyes dark, rimmed with red.
"Jonah, this is Eric. He's been here since early, asking for you. Says it's about his brother."
Eric looked small, his hands balled into fists, like he was trying to hold himself together. I walked over and knelt down in front of Eric. His hands were clenched into fists, his bottom lip trembling. "Hey, Eric. I'm Detective Jonah. What's going on, buddy?" He looked at me, his eyes wide and scared. He leaned in closer and whispered, "My brother." "I still see him," Eric whispered, his eyes darting around like he was scared someone might overhear. "He's not gone." "Not really." He was trembling, his voice so soft I had to lean into ear. A shiver ran down my spine. I pulled a chair closer and sat next to him. "What do you mean, Eric? Tell me everything." He nodded, glancing around like he was scared someone else might hear. His voice dropped to a whisper. "Tommy went missing last month," Eric continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "But he's still here. He's angry." His hands tightened, knuckles white. He looked like he was about to break apart. My heart ached for the kid. He looked so small, so scared. I rested a hand on his shoulder. "Eric, listen. I believe you. And I promise I'm going to do everything I can to help you and Tommy, all right?" Tears welled up, and he nodded, sniffing. "You have to make him stop. He scares me. He says he's going to hurt Mom. He says he'll take me too if I tell anyone. Please, Detective, you have to stop him." The weight of Eric's words hung in the air, making my chest feel like it was caving in. This wasn't just fear, it was survival. I had to figure this out, for Eric, for his mom, and for Tommy, wherever he was.